Hey everybody, this is Austin again from Craft Crickets in Eugene, Oregon. Today I want to talk a little bit about maintaining your crickets. Once they've been hatched, once they've aged a little bit, what do you need to do on a day-to-day basis? Now this video is inspired largely by questions that you have all sent in. I thank all of you for all the questions. I thought it would just be easier to answer them in a video update like this. If you've already watched the first 6 introduction to cricket farming videos, some of this may be redundant, but some of it also may be new. So if you have any questions about maintaining your crickets, this may be worth a couple minutes of your time. First question I get is, how often do I check my crickets? Now in a perfect world, the crickets would be very self-sufficient and they could go a whole lifetime without checking the crickets. I bet that can be done someday with more automation and with more sophistication. I haven't reached that point. When I first started, I liked to check every single day. And my crickets that I raise in my house, I still do check every single day, just because it doesn't take much time just to look at a few crickets and to make sure everyone's happy, healthy, there's plenty of food. In my commercial farm though, that takes too much effort to go in and look at all my crickets every single day. And so I really aim to do that about once a week. And it's taken me a while to get to a point where I only have to monitor my crickets once a week. But if you're just getting started, I would encourage you to look at your crickets every day. So what are you looking for? When you look at your crickets, first you want to make sure that they still have plenty of fresh food and fresh water. If the water is getting dirty, if you see dead crickets in the water, you're going to probably want to take that out of there and replace it. You also want to make sure that the bin hasn't gotten completely destroyed. There hasn't been spilt water, there hasn't been something that has gone bad and has started to give off a bad odor. Typically, if you smell something, that means there's something wrong with your cricket farm. So in my commercial farm, I don't look at all my crickets every day unless I smell something. If I smell something rancid coming from a corner of the warehouse, I'll go and I'll check in the bins there and I'll find what's causing it. And oftentimes that smells from something that I screwed up. Either I spilt water and that standing water has eroded some of the egg cartons or made some of the frass at the bottom of the bin all moist and rather disgusting. And I don't like that smell. Crickets don't like that smell either. So you're going to want to clean that up right away. Now, so I check my bins once a week or so in my commercial farm. I would check a lot more often though if I wasn't using water containers where the crickets had a risk of drinking all the water right away. So you want to make sure that the crickets don't run out of food and water. If your crickets can drink all their water that you give them in a day or two, you're going to have to check every day or two to make sure that they have water. Now, a lot of people want to know the cricket frass, the cricket poop that collects in the bottom of your brooders. How big of a deal is that? Is that something you need to clean out? And ideally, I clean that out as little as possible, which would ultimately mean never in the course of a cricket's lifetime if I don't have to. So if you've done everything right, your cricket environment will stay nice and dry, and the cricket frass will be rather odorless, and it will just fall to the bottom of the cricket container. But if that gets wet, it's very disgusting, and then I have to move it out. So as long as I don't get the frass wet, or as long as it's not getting mixed in too easily with the food and water, I'll just leave it at the bottom of the container. And when I'm using egg cartons for the crickets to raise up in, frass will start to collect in the little divots inside the egg cartons. So maybe once or twice during the life cycle of the crickets, I'll take the egg cartons that are in the container and I'll just shake them a little bit, ideally perpendicular with the ground, to get any of that frass to fall to the bottom and to aggregate at the bottom of the container. I don't want to have piles and piles of frass just building up inside the egg cartons, because that reduces some of the surface area for the crickets to live in, and also that gets disgusting. The crickets would rather have their frass at the bottom away from where they're living. Now, so the frass, if you can do it, try only to change it every life cycle or remove it every life cycle when you do a thorough clean of your container. Throughout the life cycle, you probably don't need to clean it though. Water though is probably the reason I have to monitor my crickets the most. So my crickets, it takes my adult crickets about a week to drink through the quantity of water I give them. So in a perfect world, I would only go in and check them once a week and make sure that they have enough water and give them more water. But like I said, sometimes you screw up, sometimes the water gets dirty, sometimes the water's contaminated and crickets start dying in it. And so then you're going to want to swap out that water earlier. I've also gotten a lot of questions about what do I feed my crickets. Now, throughout the introductory videos, I've alluded to this and talked about it from time to time, but to give a more thorough answer, what I need to give them is protein. We're growing these from a protein source, and so we have to actually give them protein. And from my personal research and from studies I've read, crickets need roughly 20% of their diet to be based off of protein. If you give them much less protein than that, they're really going to struggle to grow at an optimal level, and they also risk eating themselves as a way to get more protein, or I should say cannibalizing their friends. So the way that I do that most easily is, there's a lot of high protein grains out there. I just buy organic chick feed from my local feed store. And when I'm shopping for when I go to my feed store, they may have a dozen different types of chick feed. And I want to make sure that I'm getting it for the baby chickens, because if you look at the labels of what goes into it, you'll see the baby chickens are going to have a higher protein, anywhere from 18 to 22%, whereas the adult chicken feed might only be 6 to 8%, so that's not enough. So I take the baby chick feed, and then I just make sure that I agree with some of the other ingredients in there. The feed that I buy is pea-based. There's a lot of peas in it, there's a lot of grain in it, and then it's been fortified with some calcium and some other good stuff. I try to avoid getting cricket feed that has a lot of soy that's made into the feed, though in some places that may be the only thing available. But the crickets don't mind the soy. I just would prefer feeding them a diet not based on soy. Then, I've mentioned in my other videos, I love to give the crickets fruit and vegetables, and I do this more based off of what fruit and vegetables I have available. I have never found a type of fruit that my crickets haven't enjoyed eating. A lot of times I'll take whole apples or whole plums and I'll just put them in my brooder with my crickets. The very next day, the only evidence that there was an apple or a plum would be the seeds or the pit will be left, and everything else will be gone. You don't need to remove the skin or anything like that. They love potatoes, they love greens, but they're not the most hipster when it comes to their greens. They like things like spinach and lettuce. My crickets do not necessarily like kale and chard. I think they're probably too fibrous, and so they haven't necessarily jumped on that food bandwagon as well. They love nuts. I occasionally give them nuts. I'm in Oregon. They grow a lot of hazelnuts here in Oregon, and so a lot of times you can get some sort of leftover hazelnuts that weren't going to be processed. My crickets will devour that. I don't give them things like almonds though, because those are very highly water intensive to produce, and one of the reasons I raise crickets is for environmental reasons, and it's rather counterproductive to feed a very water intensive food item to your sustainable protein source, or what you're trying to make your sustainable protein source. But if you have a lot of almonds around, they'll love it. They'll be your best friends. Really the only thing that I haven't been able to get my crickets to eat besides some of the hipster greens would be spent grain. One of the local breweries in my town here in Eugene has let me experiment with their spent grain, and no matter what I do with it, I haven't been able to get the crickets to eat it. Maybe they can tell that all the nutrition is spent from it. I've tried drying it, I've tried grinding it up into even finer. It smells great to me, but the crickets don't like it. It could just be the type of grains that are in the spent grain, and frankly I don't know what types they are. So if you have access to some spent grain, go ahead and try it, but I just haven't had luck. But otherwise, most other things the crickets will eat. The important thing is that they're getting enough protein, and that is why I use the chick feed to serve as a good protein source that will always be available. I always make sure that they have plenty of that organic chick feed available for them. Some people don't like buying the organic chick feed. They'd rather just make their own. So, I mean, if you have the time, go ahead, mix your grains together, or look at the labels of different feeds. Look at the labels of animal or of like cat food. A lot of people feed their crickets cat food, and then they mix some calcium in with it. They're really not that picky. I just think the most important thing is that they get their protein.